Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week going over all the upcoming campaigns. If you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be, but I usually do like to start these episodes by going over some news and discoveries I just found out about over the past week. But I don't really have too much for you, so I just want to go over two things, and that's that I do work with Alex over at Boardgame Co. in order to keep track of all these upcoming campaigns. So if you do like this content, definitely check out his channel as well, because at the start of each month, he puts out a video going over the entire month and letting you know of the heavy hitters for that month. We are getting near the end of the month here, so you can expect that up really soon, but he also puts out a bunch of other great content as well that you'll definitely want to check out. And I do also want to mention Zilla Blitz, who focuses more on the historical war games. This is an area that I don't dive into as deeply, and there's also other sources and other crowdfunding platforms that do offer these games. He'll have you covered, and he also puts out a roundup every single month, letting you know of all the games from the previous month and the current month that you might want to know about. And that's pretty much it for an intro, and we don't have a crazy amount of games launching this week, but we do have a few exciting ones, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on June 24th, and this one is called Fantasy Tavern Brawl. And this one is a really interesting competitive card game because it also throws in a splash of dexterity. The way this game works is that players are all going to be starting with each of their meeples on a single tavern card located in the center of the table. But the goal of this game is to try and get as many of your colored meeples into the tavern by the end of the game, because that's going to be scoring you the most amount of victory points. The interesting thing here is that this tavern is going to be growing throughout the game as players add more cards into it. But there are a bunch of different cards offered in this game, and they all have different rules with how you can add them onto the tavern. Some of them you can just place onto the tavern quite easily, while others you might have to slide, throw, or drop into position, and they only remain as part of the tavern if they are still touching the tavern after you do that action. This means that if you're required to throw the card but you miss the tavern completely, that card's just going to get discarded and it's going to be moving on to the next player's turn. But a nice little detail that adds a lot of variety into this game is that there are a bunch of different scenario cards that you can use to play this game, and they're each going to be dictating which cards are included in that particular game and how many of each of the players are going to get. These can also introduce some different rules changes and variants as well that can change up the game even beyond the cards that you're using. But like I said, players are going to be taking turns choosing a card from their hand to play and try to add to the tavern according to its particular placement rules. And if it doesn't end up touching the tavern in any way, then that card's just going to be discarded. It's going to be moving on to the next player's turn. But if it does actually end up touching the tavern, then you also get to use the special ability of that card. And these can have all sorts of different effects, like adding or removing meeples from the tavern, which can often also require flicking, but they could also allow you to move meeples around, or even allow you to build a floor by stacking a card on top of a bunch of other meeples. If any meeples are knocked out of the tavern at any point during this process, then they are removed from play and returned to their owners. But the game continues like this until players have played all of their cards, and then you're going to be adding up the total victory points based on the meeples that players still have in play. All the meeples are just worth a victory point, but they're worth an additional victory point for each floor that you're able to get them on top of. But just keep in mind that the higher a stack of cards is, the easier it is to potentially fall. But the player with the most victory points at the end of all that wins the game, and if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Now launching on the 25th, we have Piri Summoners, and this one is a competitive abstract strategy game that also doubles as a piece of art, because this one has some really nice hand-carved meeples and also has a nice little box that you can display those meeples on. This one is a campaign that I covered last week, but it got pushed back until now, so I did already cover this one, and I will have it linked in the description down below, but I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is a competitive abstract strategy game that does also double as some decorative art, because the game is entirely made out of wood, and it also comes with this little drawer to store all the components, and the box for that drawer actually features some cut-ins that you'll be able to put all the hand-carved meeples on. This is a game where players are going to be managing a hand of cards and then creating the board by playing those cards and then taking their associated actions. On your turn, you'll be able to play one of the cards from your hand to an adjacent or diagonal location out on the board relative to any other card, and then you'll also be able to move your meeple onto that newly placed card. Each of the cards comes in one of 4 suits, with each of these suits using a sort of rock, paper, scissors mechanism, being stronger than a suit and also weaker than another suit. As you're playing these cards out onto the board, there's essentially 2 different things that you're trying to accomplish. First is just to play cards adjacent to your opponents, with the card that you're playing having a stronger suit than the card that your opponent is currently sitting on. If you're able to do that, you're going to be knocking both your opponent's meeple and the card that they're sitting on out of play, which allows you to gain a wooden coin, which is known as mana. The reason that you want those coins is because the face cards in this game do also come with a cost in order to play them. You're going to be spending those coins in order to pay that cost. But that is not the only requirement that the face cards have, because each of them are also going to feature a pattern of cards located in the bottom left corner. And if you're able to play that card adjacent to that pattern, it's actually going to allow you to eliminate all the cards that are part of that pattern other than the face card itself. And this is also the way that you win the game, because if you're able to do that 3 times before any other player, then that ends the game with you as the winner. But like I said, you do need to have those patterns out on the table in order to play these cards, so it's going to be up to you to not only play cards to knock your opponents out and get those coins, but also to create the patterns that you need in order to play your face cards. And of course, if you're interested to check this one out and learn more about the game, I will have it linked down below. Also on the 25th, we have Peaks, which is a competitive mountain climbing game, but it also does have a little bit of a cooperative negotiation aspect to it, which does keep players engaged even when it's not their turn. And the way this game works is that players are all different climbers with their own personal player board. You're going to be using this board to keep track of your stats and resources, as well as your cards, and even keep track of different upgrades that you can purchase by spending experience points throughout the game. The main board is going to be a map of the world, and there's going to be a bunch of different mountain cards that are going to be out on display, and players are going to be trying to visit these different locations of the world in order to gain access to those mountains and climb them in order to earn the rewards and the victory points earned at the end of the game. On a player's turn, they can perform one of 3 possible actions, with the first one being to prep by gathering different equipment or mountain passes that you might need in order to climb a particular mountain. Of course, another action you can perform is to rest, which will replenish some of your spent energy. And then, of course, the main action is to actually climb a mountain. And this is the really interesting one here, because you'll be able to choose from any of the available mountains out on display. You're going to be moving your meeple to that location and then attempting to climb that mountain by spending the appropriate gear and energy required to do so. But the cool thing here is that you can actually invite any of the other players at the table, and if they accept to join you on that excursion, then that's going to be reducing the amount of energy required by each of the players involved. Climbing a mountain can reward players with experience points, which can be spent to upgrade your climber or even spent for other actions in the game, or you can also gain different bonus cards that will help you in various ways. Whenever you conquer a mountain, you also have the option to spend additional energy in order to put one of your flags out in that location. And of course, this is going to be helping you gain more victory points at the end of the game if you're able to do so. But some mountains are more difficult to climb than others, and they might have more dangers and more hazards that players are going to have to be aware of. And anytime that you're climbing one of those mountains, you might also have to roll some dice to determine your overall success. You'll definitely want to have some experience points or bonus cards available to you anytime that you attempt one of these mountains, because you can spend those in order to augment your rolls and make sure that you're getting a successful one. But the game continues like this, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins. And if you want to check it out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on the 25th, we have Yield, which is a competitive area control game that's coming from the same creators that brought you the game Hidden Leaders, which is definitely a solid game. But what really stood out to me with that campaign was the campaign itself and the way that the team managed it. I think they did a fantastic job. I think they did a really great job on the game itself, but then they made the campaign quite a lot of fun. And I was a really tiny channel back then, so small that a lot of publishers would normally just ignore me or not bother trying to work with me. But I specifically remember this team being awesome to work with, and it seems like they're doing everything they can to just be part of the community and just make the whole campaign and their games as fun as they possibly can. And this game does look like a ton of fun, and it does take place in the Hidden Leaders universe, but it is going to be a very different game, and I would love to see even more games come from this team because, like I said, I think they do everything right. But in this game, players are going to be playing as different houses with their own unique power as well as their own 6 unique action cards. What makes this game stand out from a lot of other area control games is that this one does a really solid job of incorporating bluffing, because the way that this game works is that each player is always going to be controlling 3 different armies out on the map. And at the start of the game, you'll have 12 strength that you can split between those armies any way that you see fit. This means that you could make all your armies equally strong, or you could make one of them really strong and the other 2 really weak. It's really up to you, and the way that you're going to be keeping track of this is on these 3 different dials that only you get to see until you enter battle. And you do have a couple options in battle, and it's only if you decide to fight that you actually have to show them the strength on that dial. But the main board's also going to be set up with a bunch of neutral fortresses, and each player is also going to have their own starting fortress, and you're going to be placing your 3 armies adjacent or on your starting fortress, distributing that strength however you see fit. Like I said, each player is going to have 6 different action cards, but you're also going to be drawing a few battle cards, and then you're going to be choosing 7 of those to keep at the start of the game. The game plays over 3 rounds, where at the start of each round, players are going to be choosing an action card to play face down in front of them. And then you're going to be taking turns either revealing and activating that card, which is going to allow you to do all sorts of different things like move, conquer a fortress at a location with one of your armies. And one thing to note about conquering a fortress is that anytime that a player does this, it's going to be increasing the amount of victory points that fortress is worth at the end of the game. But there is also an action on some of these cards that do allow you to upgrade a fortress that you do already have control of. There's also a card that allows you to attack adjacent opponent armies, giving you a +6 bonus in that engagement. And finally, there is an action card that allows you to duplicate any of your other action cards, but anytime you do this, you do have to lower the value of one of your controlled fortresses. And one thing to note about doing this is that if you ever lower a fortress down to 0, then it's completely destroyed and permanently removed from the game. But if it gets to your turn and you feel like the card you put face down in front of you isn't actually all that helpful, you can actually choose to just leave it face down and instead draw 5 battle cards. This phase repeats 3 more times, and then you're going to be moving into the following phase, which forces players to engage in battle with any opponent armies that they're currently adjacent to. For each of these battles, players can choose whether they want to fight or retreat. If you choose to fight, you're going to be revealing the strength of your army that is involved in that battle, and then players will be able to take turns playing any battle cards from their hand to add strength into that battle. All the battle cards do have an associated terrain type, and in order to play it, you have to be engaging in a battle on that specific terrain. As long as your strength is lower than your opponent's, it's going to be your turn to play strength cards until you can either meet or exceed their strength amount. And this is going to continue back and forth until a player yields by accepting their loss, and the losing team is going to be decreasing the amount of units in their army by the difference of the final strength. But anytime your opponent meets your strength amount and it comes back to you, you actually have another option, and that's to accept a draw. In this case, the battle just ends and no other state changes in the game. This continues until every adjacent army has resolved their battle, and then any remaining armies on neutral fortresses will just instantly take those. And then any player's destroyed armies are going to be returning to one of their controlled fortresses. But then also at the end of the round, a card is going to be drawn, which is going to increase the maximum amount of units that each player can have in their armies, allowing them to recruit more units in future rounds. The game continues like this over the 3 rounds, and then the player who has the most points from controlling the various fortresses is going to be the winner of the game. And if you want to check this one out, you can go ahead and find it in the description down below, and of course you can click that Notify Me button to get notified once it launches. Also on the 25th, we have Odalin Dungeons of Doom, which is another campaign that I'm really interested in because this one is a cooperative dungeon crawler that's coming from the same creators that brought us Arena the Contest, as well as Tenaris Adventures, and these are both very well-regarded games. But unlike those 2 games, which were very similar to each other and used a lot of the same core mechanisms, Odalin Dungeons of Doom is going in a very different direction. I think this one should have less content than those previous games, which had quite a lot of content, and I think this one will have a more digestible rule set as well. But this one is a campaign game that does have an overarching story, where the results of that story will change depending on the player's decisions and successes and failures. But one thing I really do like about the way that they describe the decisions in this game is that it seems like the game's going to be rewarding you no matter which decisions you make, no matter how morally right or wrong they might be. It says here that you'll be able to save NPCs and gain allies and potentially get new quests from them, but you can also choose to ignore their requests and focus on your own goals, or even just choose to take their lives and use their possessions as your own. There will be some negative consequences along with the good, but it does seem like this is going to be balanced no matter which decisions you make, and the impact of your decisions are more going to be tailored to the way that you want to play the game, and they're going to have a bigger effect on how the actual storyline plays out. And from a gameplay perspective, anything goes. But another really neat aspect of this game is the way that the players build up their characters, because this is a game that does use a little bit of card crafting, and the way that this is all incorporated into the game is that each player is both going to be choosing a hero that they want to play as, but then you're also going to be able to choose a demon to make a pact with, and at the start of the game, both your hero and the demon will have 10 starter cards that you're going to have to mix together to form your initial deck of action cards. You'll be combining these using the sleeves provided with the game, but it'll be up to you to decide which two actions that you want to pair together. Another mechanism that I really like in this game is that players are going to have a track that they're going to be using to manage their order or chaos, and being too far in one direction or the other is going to be granting you with some negative consequences. The actions that players choose as well as the enemies they defeat could impact this, because some of the enemies can grant you with corruption, while other enemies can grant you with their souls. And players do start the game as their human form, but your goal here is to transform into your demon, because that's going to be granting you with much more powerful actions. But in order to turn into your demon and still maintain control of the demon, you need to spend both 5 souls and 5 corruption. And I also love this part of the game as well because it introduces a push your luck mechanism, because the higher your corruption is when you do this, the more powerful your demon form will be. The problem here is that if your corruption reaches its maximum amount, then you're going to be automatically turning into your demon form and losing control of that demon, attacking anything in your way, including your fellow players. This is a game where players are going to be moving through the dungeon using their action cards in order to take their various actions. Every game you play will be different from any previous games, even if you do play the same scenario over again, because the dungeon does introduce its own variability as you're drawing the dungeon cards, and then that card determining which tile is going to be added to that dungeon. The game alternates between the player's phase and the enemy's phase, with players choosing an action card from their hand in order to do different things like move around on the board, attack enemies, and try to accomplish their goals of that specific scenario. Combat in this game is resolved using dice rolling, and there are a few different types of dice that you can gain access to depending on your items and gear. And of course, you can use your abilities and different actions in order to gain additional dice, or even augment or modify the outcome of those rolls. Both the attacker and defender are going to be rolling for their attack and defense values, and then you're going to be comparing the results of those to determine how successful the attack was. Each of the enemies will also have their own attack deck, and during the enemy's phase, you're going to be drawing a card from each of the enemy's deck, and then resolving the effects of that card. Rounds continue like this until one of the endgame conditions are met for that scenario, and then players will be able to move into the next chapter of the campaign. But one thing to note about this game is that in between the scenarios, you'll actually have some opportunities to visit different camps, and at these camps, players will be able to upgrade their characters using the different items and resources that they found during the previous scenario. This is one of the main ways that players will be able to modify their deck as they play through the overarching campaign, but if this one does sound interesting to you, definitely go ahead and check it out, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below. Also launching on June 25th, we have the next game coming from Ludus Magnus Studios, and this one is called Blood, and it is a cooperative boss battler that can be played both as one-off scenarios or as an overarching campaign. This is a vampire-themed boss battler, so each of the bosses that you're going up against is going to be some form of a vampire, with of course some of these being more powerful than others as you work yourself up the hierarchy. Each of the scenarios offered in the game is going to have its own unique setup and different points of interest that are going to be placed out on the main board. And of course, they will have different objectives that players are trying to complete as they're trying to defeat that specific boss. The game alternates between a night phase and a day phase, where during the night phase, players are going to be taking actions and fighting the vampires and monsters. Then the day phase is where you're going to be able to pay for different abilities and upgrades and try to set yourself up as best you can for the following night. Players are going to be playing as their own unique character with their own unique deck of action cards, which also doubles as their health. Players will each have their own player board to keep track of all of this, as well as any items and gear that they find along the way, which of course can grant you with all sorts of different effects and abilities. The centerpiece of the night phase is this night board, which is going to be walking you through the various steps of that phase, and this can be populated with different cards throughout the game, with each type of card being isolated to a particular part of that board. The cards that do accumulate on this board do get activated in a particular order, and you're going to be starting by activating the events, and then you're going to be activating the player's action cards, and then the minions' actions, and then finally the main boss. This is why the day phase is so important, because this is going to give players more opportunities to modify that board, which is inherently going to be affecting the way that the night phase plays out. Of course, players are going to have very limited control over the events, the minions, and the boss cards, so it is up to you to make sure that you're playing the appropriate action cards to mitigate the negative effects of the other cards as much as possible. But there's a ton of variety across these action cards and even more variety across the different characters, and players are going to be using this to resolve the different actions that those cards grant, move around the board, attack different enemies, interact with different points of interest, and help their fellow players to eventually take out that final boss. Combat in this game is resolved using dice rolling, and players are going to be trying to roll dice above a certain value in order to land a successful hit. Of course, the items you have or the weapons you're using could be used to either augment those rolls or increase the amount of damage that you deal for a successful hit. But something that's nice about this game is that you are also somewhat rewarded for your failures as well. So if you're not landing those successful hits, you're at least going to be moving up this track for your failures. And as you move up that track, it's going to be granting you access to certain bonuses. And anytime on a future turn, you'll be able to cash out that track to get the associated bonus. But the rounds continue like this, back and forth between the day phase and the night phase, and then you're going to be resolving the order of the cards on that night board, going through the events, the players' actions, and then the minions and the final boss. And then if the players are able to defeat the boss, then they win that scenario. And if you want to check this one out, I do have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on June 25th, we have the Heroes of Stanley Park. And this one is a card battler dueling game where at the start of the game, you're going to be drawing 10 cards and then choosing 5 to keep as your starting hand. The goal of this game is to get your opponent's health down to 0, and each player is going to be starting with 30 health at the start of the game. This is a game that plays over a series of turns, and on your turn, you'll be able to draw 2 more monster cards into your hand, and then you'll be able to put monster cards into play. The way that works is that each of the monsters is going to be associated with a certain level located in the bottom left corner of that card. And you can always play either a level 2 card or up to 2 level 1 cards into your play area for free on your turn. But in order to get your more powerful cards into play, you have to discard cards already in play so that the total level of the discarded cards equals the level of the card that you're going to be replacing them with. This means that if you had 3 level 2 cards in play already, you could discard them in order to put in this level 6 card. Once you're done with playing your monster cards, you'll then be able to play a spell card, and there's 2 options that you can choose when doing this. You can either use it and then discard it immediately, or instead you can place it face down below a monster card to make it available for a future turn. Spell cards can have all sorts of different effects, and they can also help you in battle, which is why you might want to have those out so that they can help you when you're attacking or defending against your opponent. During a battle, players are going to be comparing either the attack or defense stats, and then you're going to be rolling dice to modify those results. The losing player is going to be reducing their health by the difference of those stats. Then the game continues like this until one of the player's health is brought down to 0. Then the other player is the winner of the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I do have it linked down below. Also launching on the 25th, we have the Ginza Retro Cafe, which is a competitive game where players are going to be using dice rolling to try and get certain sets of dice in order to complete orders and earn victory points for the end of the game. This is a game that plays over a series of rounds where you're going to have new customers showing up at the cafe, with each of these customers having 2 or 3 orders that they want to have fulfilled. Orders can be of different difficulty, but players are going to be taking turns each round, rolling their dice to try and complete these orders, or instead you can choose to spend your dice to get coins, which you'll be able to use to manipulate your dice in a future round. Some orders are more difficult to fulfill than others, but if you are able to fulfill them, you will be rewarded with more victory points, and players will have certain orders that they're trying to complete in order to complete objectives for additional victory points. And this game does also have a sort of cooperative element where if all the orders are fulfilled for a particular customer, then the players that were able to contribute to that will also be rewarded with additional victory points. Players do normally need to work together in order to achieve this because each of the customers only sticks around for 2 rounds, and then that opportunity is going to be lost. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds of players trying to complete those orders in order to gain the most victory points, and the player who's able to do that at the end wins the game. And if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also launching on June 25th, we have 2 2-player abstract strategy games coming from the designer Rainer Knizia, who is a fantastic designer and has created one of my favorite 2-player games known as The Lost Cities. Of course, he has a ton of other great games as well, but the 2 offered here are called Iliad and Ichor. And the first one I'm going to go through is Iliad, which, like I said, is a 2-player abstract strategy game. And in this game, you're going to be playing as either the Blue Warriors or the Red Warriors. And your whole goal here is to try and earn a token for each one of the 5 different gods, because if you're able to do that and your opponent isn't, then you automatically win the game. But if you are both able to do that, then you're going to be tallying up the victory points gained from those tokens. This game's played on a board that's broken into a bunch of different spaces that alternate between each of the player's colors, and each player is going to be starting the game with a number of tiles, with those tiles having a value anywhere from 0 all the way up to 5. When you set up the board, you're going to be randomly assigning the god tokens around the perimeter of the board, and then there's going to be 5 left over that are going to be just put off to the side. Players will each individually shuffle up their tiles, and then you're going to be randomly drawing 2 and assigning them to your spaces in the center of the board. Players will then draw a hand of 2 tiles, and then you're going to be taking turns choosing a tile from your hand in order to place it out on the board. Whenever you place a tile, it does have to be adjacent to an existing tile, and you can only place tiles onto spaces that also match your player color. And when you place a tile, you're also going to be checking if there are any new completed rows or columns. If that's the case, each player is going to be adding up the total of the values on each of their tiles in that row or column, and the player that has the higher value is going to be able to choose which token that they want from either side of the board. For example, this side has a -10, so you might want to pick the other side and force your opponent to take this tile. But like I said, the victory points don't actually matter if your opponent isn't able to get each of the 5 different gods. Something else that you'll want to be aware of when you are placing your tiles is the fact that each of the tiles also have a special ability. This can allow players to do all sorts of different things like reposition tiles or tokens out on the board, or even swap their god tokens in their hand with the unused tokens that were off to the side of the board. And what's neat about the ability of the tile with the 0 value is that its actual value is the sum of its 2 adjacent tiles in the row or column that you are currently trying to score. The game continues like this until no more tiles can be played, and then the winner is going to be either the player that has 5 different god tokens or the player with the most victory points. As I said, Ichor is also an abstract strategy game, but this one does play very different from Iliad, and in this game players are going to be playing either as the gods or the monsters as they compete to try and take control over the board. This game does introduce some asymmetry as the gods and the monsters do play differently from each other because each of the units will have their own unique power, and each of the units are going to have a card associated with them that will let you know what that unit's power is. This is a game that also plays over a series of turns, but on your turn you can either choose to move a unit or activate a unit. If you choose to move a unit, you can move any distance in a straight line, and you're going to be adding one of your player tokens onto any spaces that you move through. This is an important detail because your goal in this game is to try and get all of your character tokens out on the board first, because if you're able to do that, that's going to be triggering the end of the game. You're going to be scoring points equal to the amount of tokens that your opponent still has off the board. Of course, there are some restrictions with the movement, and you're going to have to stop if you ever reach the edge of the board, or if you run into another figure. But like I said, rather than using a basic move action, you can also use your turn to activate one of your unit's special abilities, and these abilities might just grant you with a better movement action, but they could also allow you to modify, move, or swap units out on the board, or even do the same thing with the player tokens, or even add more of your player tokens out on the board or remove some of your opponents. But these abilities do also come with a fun restriction, which is that these are only one-time use, and after you've used a ability for a particular figure, it's not going to be accessible for the rest of the game, so you're really going to want to time when you use it. But as I said, the end of the game is going to be triggered once a single player gets all of the character tokens out on the board. Then they're going to be scoring points based on the number of tokens their opponent doesn't have on the board. Then you'll be able to swap sides, play again, and then the most total points at the end of those 2 games wins the game. And if you do want to check out either of these games, I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below. And of course, you can click to get notified. And launching on June 27th, we have the Tales from the Red Dragon Inn, the second printing, which is going to allow you to get all the previous content offered for this game, and there are going to be a few quality of life upgrades with this new edition as well. Unfortunately, I don't have much more info on what the quality of life upgrades actually entail, so if you do want to learn more about that, I do have a link to the campaign down below, and you can go ahead and check that out for yourself. But if you're not familiar with how this game actually plays, I did cover the game during its original campaign, so I do have previous footage for you here, and I'll just go ahead and roll that now. And this is from the same creators who created the Red Dragon Inn, and this isn't really a prequel or a sequel, it's more of a sidequel because it just takes place in the same world, and you'll see some of the same characters that you have seen from that world as well. But you're going to be taking them out on an adventure outside the walls of the Red Dragon Inn. And this is a cooperative dungeon crawl campaign-driven adventure where players are going to be visiting some different maps and experiencing some very different scenarios like dungeon exploration, rescue missions, chase scenes, or tug of wars. Each map is also going to feature some different monsters, challenges, treasures, and objectives to complete, and players will win by completing their party's objective or lose if the enemies achieve their own. Players will also be able to upgrade their characters throughout the campaign, and they'll be able to choose from an array of abilities to customize their hero as the game progresses. And new items can also be found throughout the game, which is a really neat feature because not only can you find new items, you can also upgrade them throughout the game. And these items don't actually belong to any single member on the team. Items can be easily swapped between members in between scenarios to decide how you want to outfit your characters for the next portion of the game. The game does use dice for combat, but instead of rolling to hit, you're going to be rolling to perform a critical hit. So if you're interested in a campaign game with some very different scenarios, a ton of upgrades for your individual characters, as well as items that can be traded amongst the party, this is definitely one you'll want to check out. Launching on the 28th, we have the not safe for work version of the game Wacky Puppies, and I actually filmed this one last week before I realized it was launching this week. But I did realize this before I actually uploaded the video, so I haven't aired this footage before. So basically I'm just saying all this so you understand the sudden change of clothes. This is a party game where the goal of the game is to not hold both a bomb and a detonator at the same time. If that ever happens, then you explode and you are eliminated from the game. And of course, there will be a bunch of ability cards that players can use to help themselves or harm their opponents. And there will be cards that will allow you to delay explosions, escape from them, disarm, or even deflect them to other players. And a neat layer on top of this is that you can actually collect sets of cards for some even more powerful abilities. Negotiation is allowed in this game, so you can form alliances whenever it suits you, but you are never actually held to any agreements, so if you're banking on a future favor from another player, keep in mind that they can backstab you anytime that they like. Adding to the party element, the game does also offer a bunch of different challenge cards in the deck. And these will have players doing different mini-games like staring contests or thumb wars or things like that, and of course you will be rewarded or punished depending on whether you win or lose those challenges. Like I said, this version is going to be a not safe for work version of the game, so if you're looking to get a little filthy while you play this one, this is the version you want to get. And that's it for this week, but don't leave yet because we still got a few awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. You don't have to like or subscribe or do anything like that, although I do appreciate it. All you got to do is leave a comment down below, and that's going to get you entered in for this giveaway. And this first one we have here is for Sovereign Fall of Wormwood. And this one's a really interesting card battler that can play 2 to 4 players, and something that makes this one unique is that when you play a card, you actually have to build it first. It's going to take a certain amount of rounds to build, so you're going to be putting it face down with a token on the tracker on the back side of that card. But there are other cards that you can play or discard in order to speed up the rate at which those cards are built. This means that it is possible to play and build a card in the same turn, and the main goal here is to try and gain 10 of these echo cards either by building them or acquiring them from your opponent. As you build your cards, you'll be able to position them out into your tableau in order to defend other cards that you might be building or other cards that you do have in play, so the positioning does matter here. You'll want to take advantage of that to try and protect the echo cards as you're building them, or maybe even mislead your opponent by protecting cards, making them look more valuable than they actually are. And this giveaway is going to get you a pledge for the base game as well as 4 additional expansion decks, and all you got to do to enter this giveaway is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Wormwood. And I can't really think of a theme for this week, so you can just go ahead and say anything that you want, and that'll get you entered into the giveaway. And this next giveaway is for a pledge for the Gamelax 3D printed game library, which is a modular system designed to be compatible with the IKEA Kallax shelf. It's going to provide all sorts of different solutions for storing components or smaller games or even playmats, and it will also allow you to store your games the superior way, horizontally. Lots of cool ideas here, and if you do have access to a 3D printer, this is definitely worth taking a look at. And this giveaway will grant you access to those digital files, and all you got to do to enter this giveaway is leave a comment down below with the hashtag shelf. And this giveaway and the previous one are both offered worldwide, so anyone can feel free to enter this. And I'm going to keep up the giveaways on the Discord this week as well, with these 2 next giveaways being offered over there. And if you're not familiar with the Discord, you can find a link to it in the description below. head over to the giveaways channel and then click the emoji underneath that giveaway. This will be automatically drawn at the end of the week. And the first giveaway we have is for a pledge for license to Krill, where players are going to be trying to collect different sets. But as they're doing so, there's going to be a whale moving around the board, eating cards from the various players. The nice thing about this is that the players do have some control as to which of the players the whale targets, because players will be drafting cards from a shared market with each of those cards being associated with a different action for the whale. So you'll want to consider that when you decide which cards that you want to take. This giveaway is going to get you a copy of the game, and like I said, all you got to do to enter this one is head over to the Discord channel and then click the emoji underneath that giveaway. And this next giveaway is going to be for a print and play version of Tales of the Sea. And this is a game where players are going to be captains of a ship, managing their morale and taking different actions to find and bury treasure, control different islands, or fight the other players as they try to make their way down one of the many paths to victory. Once again, you can enter this giveaway by clicking the emoji underneath the giveaway on the Discord, and the order that the winners are drawn is going to dictate which prize they've won. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways, and we had a pledge for Phantom Ink Arcana as well as a pledge for Dark Blood. To draw a winner, I use this application here, and all these extra names down here are bonus entries for my supporters over on Ko-fi, and if you want to help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me, I do appreciate it, and you can find a link to that in the description down below. I don't charge publishers or require them to send me any games for coverage, so any support here really does mean a lot. But let's go ahead and draw a winner with the first giveaway we're drawing for being Phantom Ink. So let's do that. And the winner is Peter1471, and he says that he was interested in both of these games. So I'm happy to say that you now at least have a pledge for one of them. Congrats on the win, and just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that pledge all sorted out. And let's go ahead and do the exact same thing here for Dark Blood and draw a winner. And the winner for that pledge is Douglas Naden, which is a supporter over on Ko-fi. So congratulations on the win. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here, but feel free to email me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that all sorted out. And that's everything I got for you this week, although I am filming this one a couple days earlier because I do have plans this weekend, so hopefully I didn't miss anything that's announced in the last minute here, but if I did and it's worth mentioning, I'll make sure to say it at the start of next week's episode. And next week does already look pretty interesting, as we got Brink launching and a new expansion for Kemet and Zoo Tycoon, as well as a ton of other games already. I'm sure there's more to come. But until then, thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
Oh.